This is Romans chapter 11 and on. John chapter 11. Take that. It's like that 10 time.
It's a good thing you're here.
All right.
You ready?
Yep.
Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. If anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, will he recover? Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us all go, that we may die with him.
All right, what stands out?
Sounds like predestination. He died just so that he brought back to life.
And what does that remind you of, that the predestination or the providence piece? Is there another miracle that points to? We saw a little earlier in the text this year.
Yeah, I keep getting.
Blind man,
Yeah, that's
the whole narrative of the blind man and the spitting, and we dug into that ad nauseum, why he would spit in the in previous episodes.
The seventh, is that right?
Yeah.
He's performed
Yeah.
in this chapter.
And this is the big one. So just like the blind man, where he said this blind man was blind, and the Pharisees said, who sinned, his parents, or did he sin? And he's like, no one sinned, people. Like that's just, and again, let that frame your mind in understanding how they're viewing. To them, your physical ailments, the things that happen to you, are a cause and effect sort of dynamic, that's how they view the world. So he's saying, no, this is Jesus saying, his Lazarus, close friend, goes unto death. So, medically, I'm assuming he was dead. I'm sure they had, they didn't have mirrors and they weren't doing the breathing thing. It's not fogging up. Call Jesus. He probably sat there and it was warm and they were like, hey, he's dead. So chances are he was dead, but this is not the resurrection. This is not the same thing. This is power over death, but not the end of death. In other words, this is an instance of Jesus controlling death as its domain in an instance. This is not the conquering of death that comes through the death and resurrection of Christ. And it's important to make that distinction between those two. What else do you see in there? Anything?
I think they were close friends. Mary and Mark, he'd spent a lot of time with all of them. And that was probably hard for them to swallow, that he didn't hop to and get there when Lazarus was still alive. And that maybe they probably felt a little forlorn.
Yeah, and then he gets there and they don't understand what he's doing.
Yeah.
Is he sleeping? Is he not sleeping?
No, Jesus intentionally first said he's fallen asleep. He did not say he is dead.
He's been a little tricky with his language.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine this study Bible letter said, let's go that we may die with him. And then it addressed that as saying, while the Lord saw their development in faith, Thomas saw their deaths, yet in his loyalty he followed anyway.
Yeah, why did they say, let us die with him?
I think they thought he was going to die. I mean, let us go die with them. Let us also go die with them in terms of, well, the question becomes, disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll be all right. And Jesus said, he'd been speaking of it, and he gets to the point in 14, he says, he told them plainly, because clear they weren't, Lazarus is dead. And he said, for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. In other words, it was predestined that he would not be there. And then Thomas, whose close twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go. Let me think, what we may die with him.
Can you be talking about Jesus there? Were they concerned that he might be stoned?
Yeah.
Yes, probably like, let us put ourselves at risk too, because you go back up to the previous side, what Rabbi, Jews were just trying to stone you, so let us go and take this risk with him. All right, who wants to do 17 through?
I had
Oh, yeah.
I've always wondered this since I was this little and never had the guts to ask. Why did Mary dry his feet with her hair? What's the significance of that? A piece of cloth.
Yeah, I mean, intimacy, I mean, this is a sense, I mean, and also I mean, it was probably good for her hair. She's like, I get a double use out of it. I think it's largely interpreted as being an intimate action. And because a towel, not only that, but if you sopped it up then with a towel, what are you doing with the towel? And it's not like they have hand towels laying around.
It was kind of a big deal too that her hair was down, right?
Yeah.
Because that would not have been, probably protocol there, that her hair would have been covered or.
His relationships with Mary and Martha would have been challenging to protocol. He kept a much tighter relationship with them than most rabbis would probably take. But this is what Jesus does across the board. He challenges by the social norms, by being with the woman at the well, by protecting the woman who's about to be stoned, by saying, little children, come unto me. Everything that the dominant class says, these people are property, they're second class, we don't have to worry about them. Jesus is saying, no, I need you to stop and think, and I'm going to demonstrate that. All right, anything else? Okay, 17, who wants to read? Ben, you started last time.
I will.
I mean,
With caveat, my Bible adds extra words in to clarify or whatever, so it may not match.
17 through 27.
To 27. Right here. Okay. So when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had come to see Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning the loss of their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary remained sitting in the house. When Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus told her, your brother will rise from the dead. Martha replied, I know that he will rise from the dead in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, adheres to and trusts in and relies on me as Savior will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me as Savior will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I have believed you and continue to believe that you are Christ the Messiah, the Anointed, the Son of God, who is destined and promised to come into the world, and it is you that the world has waited.
Man, what version is that? That's the extra stuff in there.
Huh? I didn't actually know.
It's a training.
It's
It's the annotated,
AMP,
huh?
AMP.
Amplified? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, you said you were the several other terms, but also Messiah.
Well, I went beyond.
Yeah, well,
It puts in parentheses to explain,
Does
because
your-
it's a training Bible.
Well, what does yours say?
It says, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world.
Mine says Messiah, but it also says it says or the Christ.
Yeah, all those extra things are in parentheses.
Yeah.
So in here you have one of the I am statements, one of the 7 I am statements. I am the resurrection and life. But what else? Anything out this? So we have the problem presented in the previous section. Now we have Jesus on the way. Martha comes out to meet him, and we have an exchange. What do we learn about Martha and Jesus in that exchange?
Well, she's upset at first, and then when he tells her, do you believe in me and trust in me, she says yes. And she believed that her brother would be resurrected, but not until the resurrection, not right now.
And this is actually a pretty big instance of belief, because the disciples up to this point still don't get it.
Right.
Even though they.
Even though they're hanging out with Jesus way more and witnessed way more.
But even at this point in history, did the Jewish people have a concept of resurrection?
Not in the way that we do.
Yeah.
So even for her to say this,
Right. It's a big statement.
it's a pretty big statement. And to be, and in some sense, it's probably is curated around the notion of, there's a mosquito, there's an electric buzzer there if anyone wants to kill the mosquito. So they may resurrect.
Hopefully they are.
But we'll leave it here for 4 days.
But the notion, so let me ask you this. Jesus was resurrected, but in this he says, I am, meaning the existence of the resurrection and the life. What goes through your mind when you hear that? I am the resurrection.
I am the source.
Well,
Yeah,
what he's going to do will enable resurrection, my view.
Well, and he's God. I am the one that will make this bring about the resurrection, but I also am going to bring him back to life.
And he's trying to distinguish that. So Jesus uses this kind of like, oh, homie, I'm going to raise Lazarus from the dead. This was preordained. He knows he's going to do this. But in this case, he uses it to test Martha and to question her faith, not in a condemning way, but in an opportunity to demonstrate way. And I think that, Martha gets a bad rap. Because we live in an overworked society that we're workaholics, and we're like, oh, we should all be more like Mary. Martha worked too much. She's type, so all you type A, and they're like, what? I love Martha. But here you have the case where she's running out, she's meeting him. She's again in the action of doing. I'm not saying Mary's lazy. She's like, I'll stay here. But there's a sense of, she went out to meet, she went out to declare, and so therefore she becomes part of the teaching narrative.
It sounded like she might be a little bit angry at Jesus at first.
Well, yeah.
In here, he would not.
Well, 4 days into it, maybe she's thinking like, where's Jesus? Like, I know that if he was here, this wouldn't have happened. But like, why isn't he here? How often do we feel that way?
Right.
If God showed up, things would be different.
Yeah.
So, Justin, would you talk again about the parallel? A few minutes ago, you talked about there's a distinction between this resurrection and the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
They're both conquering death, because Lazarus, like Jesus, died and was in a tomb for 4 days instead of 3 days.
So up to this point, when you think about Jesus' ministry and power over the earthly world, he does not have complete dominion. He has power in the world, and he uses his power that comes from the Trinitarian God to basically, I think what I view as commanding the elements of the world. Telling those angels or celestial beings who oversee or govern the waters, the natural laws, saying, stop, do this, and the same thing is true with death. Now, saying that, Lazarus had a soul, and the question becomes, and the challenge of Lazarus is, 4 days dead, where's his soul hanging out? Right. And so this leads us to lots of conversations about what happens after death. Now, the standard Catholic view is you die, you go to purgatory. So, and actually that actually makes more sense. You can reconcile this one more, like, he went to purgatory, then came back out. He's working on some stuff and working on the chain gang. Isn't that what it is, Jim? Chain gang? Jim's our token Catholic, so we have to make fun of him. It's only in good Protestant keeping. No, just kidding. But no. But that notion, he went somewhere and then he had to come back. Now, most Protestants, whether or not they say it or not, they often believe in something called soul sleep. That the minute you die, your body goes, or your soul, body, physical body dies, and your spirit goes into limbo. It's a strong Reformed doctrine. Some people like to challenge that. Some people say you go into a place of paradise, and this is taken largely from Jesus and the criminal on the cross. Today you'll be with me in paradise. Now that could be, paradise could be everything outside this earthly realm. But paradise also is something that is used that connects back to the Genesis story of paradise. And it doesn't necessarily mean a garden in paradise, but it just means, so it means that you're beyond this world. So we don't know. He went somewhere. He didn't come back with some level of consciousness. There's no conversation. It's not like, Lazarus wrote the next book, came back from the dead. I was dead for 4 days. But the reason it's different is Jesus reversed the curse of death in an instance. He defied the bound, obviously 3 days in the hot sun, no embalming, he probably was getting ripe. And he probably was slathered with oil and kept it, but if by any measure in that, he would have been stinking. So Jesus literally took the elements of his body and had to reverse or just correct, which means he has command over the elements of decay, the elements of decline, the elements of death that exist in our material world. That is very distinctly different from the death and resurrection that we will experience, because we believe that we will come back and be resurrected in Christ's body. So this is what I bank on, superhero theory. We're going to fly. We're going to walk through walls. We're still going to get to eat some fish. You can walk on water. All those things, because those are just laws set up by a divine being that created a material world that is ordered. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Lucy, Scarlett Johansson. The idea is that she ingests some drug. I don't want to go into the plot, but the idea is that the whole thing is premised around how much of her brain she uses. And it's really, really interesting in terms of a metaphysical expression, because as her brain percentage increases, she becomes more and more aware of her surroundings, being able to control her surroundings, being able to. So in other words, we use at best 6-7% of our brain, up to maybe 12 or 13% on the, what if we had capacities to use those more things? So I think that our resurrected bodies represent something that is more akin to what Christ was. And Lazarus didn't come back with any powers.
So you may not want to chase this rabbit right
Yeah.
now, but the Apostle Creed has a statement in it that Jesus was crucified,
Died.
descended into hell. That's the
Descended into hell, yeah.
okay. Is that obviously that's scriptural somewhere?
So we don't know what hell is, and I think Protestantism over the last 200 years has projected it as this literal place where there's burning and a guy with a pitchfork and a forked tail and horns. There are lots of views. If you go back into the archives of our Bible studies, we did a whole series on hell and the layers and the celestial beings, and dug around in that. I think it was 2 summers ago. I don't remember. I can look it up if you're really interested. But so if you want to dig around in that, we did a study on him. What happened? What is Hades? My personal opinion is hell is the obliteration of the existence of a soul. Because there's so much emphasis on when God says at the burning bush, "I am that I am." I've always said that's a statement of ultimate existence. I am really. In some sense, if you've seen the movie Matrix, or when we studied Scientology a couple of years ago and Christian Science, the idea that this is an illusion is really not that far-fetched. In the sense of this is kind of an illusion in that, yeah, it's our consciousness that understands it, but it's temporal. 100 years from now, we're all going to be, everyone physically will be here, will be dust or some decaying form of it. Your teeth will probably be around. So I'm having mine pulled out and crushed. Just to give the bodily resurrection a challenge.
Didn't you think of hell too as separation from
Yeah.
God?
Separation, and
And he was separated from the Father there for a period of time.
I think
which would be hell.
the whole scripture can be understood in the terms of presence or proximity, and I've said that many times. But the question of where Lazarus went, what happened in those 4 days, we don't know. we talk about human, what it is make to be someone human, their consciousness, the self-awareness, the ability to, those sort of things. Did he have a sense of awareness? We have all these people in our modern day times who are like, I died and came back, and let me tell you about it.
And Christ could have suspended it too.
Christ could have done a little
Because
mind
he
wipe
knew-
too. He didn't want to like
He
any.
knew this was happening, he knew
Yeah, look,
Lazarus was gonna die, he knew he was gonna get there, and.
he's like, you don't remember this. You were never here.
So this story is not in any of the other gospels, is that correct?
I don't know that. Is that true?
I don't know.
I didn't read that today, so I didn't.
I guess the question I ask myself, particularly in reading John, is why did John include this story
Yeah,
and the other? I mean,
I
it seems to be a
think
pretty
it is.
short story.
I'm pretty sure it's in Luke. Anyone, you want to look at Luke? This is why we have an intern. Our interns.
Well, part of the reason is he's leading up to the death of Jesus and how the Pharisees and everybody is plotting against him, and the raising of Lazarus must have been really big news.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that,
They were really fearing him then.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to show us why these people wanted to kill him.
well, and I also think it ties to that notion of him being the resurrection. He's saying, I am the resurrection, and I control it
He
now.
said it again.
Only in John.
It's gonna,
It's only in John.
it's only in John?
Really, and that's a huge story.
The Lazarus
There's
mentioned
mention
in
of it
Luke
in
is the beggar and Lazarus and the rich man.
Not his death.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has the Mary and Martha story.
Why would a story so big only be in one gospel?
Well, you got a timing, story. I mean, you say, why wouldn't have Mark included this? Yeah, it seems to be like he would have. And in particular, which has some of the major figures. This goes back into the idea why I think there are problems with Scripture. Why not? Why is it that the temple turning over the tables is at the beginning of John and at the end of Luke? Did it happen twice? Why is it that the throw your nets on the other side also happened in John, but happened at a different time in the calling of the disciples in Luke? So one is these are the challenges that we as interpreters face. And I think you're right, though. You have to then say, in the scheme of what John is trying to do, remember, this is the court motif. He's portraying, and as much as these are narratives, the whole thing has that sense of, we're going to demonstrate who Jesus is. So the question you're always asking in it is, who is Jesus in the story? Lazarus really isn't, he is a side character in the same way the blind guy was. He just happens to be Jesus' good buddy. But the fact that Jesus raises someone from the dead after 4 days, and in the dialogue that has been curated by John or the Johannine community, one of the 7 I am statements is in there. I am the resurrection and the life. Now, Lazarus was going to die again, just like Jesus died and then rose, and in the resurrection it wouldn't happen. But he's trying to say, in me you have life. And he goes on to say that I am the resurrection. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe in this? She said, yes, Lord. This is like the heart of the gospel. In fact, I'm surprised we don't use this more, if I read it.
But I think, this is kind of stating the obvious, but the whole purpose of this entire story and situation, Jesus knew what this was going to tell those that opposed him. And it was just driven home by the fact that Lazarus was dead for 4 days.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, you should have gotten here 30 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he was dead, maybe he wasn't. But, there's no question after 4 days that he was, he was.
So my theory is this: 2 days he wasn't stinky enough. 3 days would be confusing with his own resurrection. So he's like, yeah, let's just add another day. Then it'll really be right. That's the icing. The extra day was the icing on the miracle. The stinky icing on the miracle.
Interesting, the other incident of Jesus raising someone from the dead is the young girl. And that is in the other 3 Gospels, but not in John.
And and again, you have people who compare all of these Gospels in far more depth of why, and we don't know. The bottom line is we don't know why. Again, there are so many, out of order stories? Why does some contain the others? They were all written, remember Mark was written first. It's the most basic, most rudimentary. And then Luke, the historical account, and Matthew, the Jewish projected account, both have a source of Mark. They both have their own sources, and then they have a source called Q. And we don't know what Q is, but Q is the common parts of Mark, or of Matthew and Luke. Then you have John, a decade or two later, probably around the same time he was writing Revelation. But his focus is, and you know what, you see the development of Greek Gnosticism, that divide between flesh and spirit, and you see that transition in Paul too. Paul gets far more into that Gnostic world of saying the heaven and the earth, and one's evil and one's good. And you see that by the time John's writing this, it has far more of those philosophical overtones. One of the things I didn't say on Sunday that I suggested though, was that, you know, one of the challenges we have in our modern day times is the Old Testament has a very anthropomorphic God, very physical, very like an image of a human being in some sense, but not and then you have Jesus, who's very concrete, and then you have this sort of amorphous, blown up, all of a sudden you just blew the categories off the water. Well, because again, Greek mythology. And if you know, as you look at how those images change, there are some that suggest that actually the God of the Greek New Testament, this triune God, is really a distortion of who God is. And that God is more anthropomorphic, that God is more interactive, that we have sort of disregarded that. The whole thing is sort of wrapped up in what's called process theology. And that is the idea that God self-limits at the beginning of creation and says, I'm going to actually not see ahead. I can project or predict, but if you have free will, then I'm going to sort of unfold over time. And so, in other words, if that's true, then it explains some of that self-revelation that God's like, I'm just going to allow them to interpret who I am as they go. And I mean, you know, you might say our interpretation of God is vastly different than it was at these times, or even 200 years ago.
All time, through time?
That we are constantly, that God is constantly being revealed to us. I mean, the notion that God is this all-loving God and will never do anything bad is the you know, the shiny object in evangelical or in Western Christianity as a whole. We can't deal with a God that punishes or has wrath, or that might do harm or might damn some to hell. That is people. Oh, if that's the God that you worship, I don't want to have anything. Well, I can't help it. It's here. Every society, every people group, every generation has a slightly nuanced view of God, and we're guilty of it too.
I just find it remarkable that the powers to be, that this event, didn't it change at least some minds? Like, they turned around and said, you know, okay, this guy was dead for 4 days and he raised it. Maybe he is who he says he is.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be nice.
Well, to us it would be, but again, that's spirit. I mean, this is why they needed the law. What, killing someone is bad? Like, really, did God have to give them that one? Like, thou shalt not kill. Oh, I didn't think about that. I guess that's kind of bad. That's how stupid they were. Now you're like, I can't imagine killing someone. Like, that'd be the worst thing. Part of that's culturally developed ethics, but largely that's the spirit. So, all right. Jesus Weeps, 28 to 37. Anyone want to read? Nice and loud.
After she said this, she went back to her sister, Mary, back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said. He is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still in a place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb and mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came up along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved and in spirit troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he left him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of blind men have kept this man from dying?
You're setting him up.
Yeah.
John is setting him up, or the authors of, the Johannine community are setting him up.
It's not
No.
you.
I was moving stuff around, but why do you think Jesus cried?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I think because they were questioning him, they didn't have faith in him, and it hurt him to see them hurting.
Yeah.
They're so devastated.
And I think it's probably more the latter of those two. I don't think Jesus' feelings were probably hurt. I think it's and that's what it demonstrates.
His compassion.
His profound compassion, even though he's not really dead. He's in paradise, so asleep. I'm going to bring him back here in a few minutes. Like, if you walk into a room and you know you're going to solve an issue, you don't mourn over the issue. But I think in some sense, the sense of who Jesus and his compassion was, he knows, and this is where you get the notion that Jesus knows our suffering, the sense of loss. I mean, this is a community mourning. And I think that we've privatized, we've made death taboo, and we've privatized our mourning. We don't want people to see us mourn, but this was a emotional, Jewish, culturally, ethnic, collective group, and mourning would have went on for days. And also keep in mind, like when you think about the fact that, if I go on Facebook, I got 3,000 plus friends that I really don't know. And if any of them, and probably if like 99% of them died, I'd be like, well, that's sad. And then I'd move on with my life. Oh, I thought I ordered the chicken salad, not the tuna salad. No.
Jason,
Yes.
would there be a difference here too? Because Mary, as soon as she saw him, she knelt at his feet. Martha didn't do that. There was something about her, I don't know, just her throwing herself at his feet almost, I think that touched him.
Could be in her brokenness. I mean, I think it's genuinely like, it's kind of like when you see someone, I guess the best comparable thing would be if you've ever been on a missions trip to Africa or South America or some impoverished area. Like when I went to the reservation down in Sholo and I could feel the oppression, and I'm watching these little kids run around and they're dirty and have flies flying, like, it's like a commercial for World Vision. And your heart breaks. And even though Jesus was going to perform a miracle and fix the problem in the moment, and even though he was going to die and resurrect and offer resurrection to us, we're still stuck in this sucky position. Our bodies are still, broken and hurt and in pain, and we got to live in them.
And we're in our humanity.
And we're in the brokenness of our humanity. We have to feel the pain of death. We have to journey through that. So in some sense, I wonder if it was a broader, almost existential mourning for they're hurting, they're going to carry on hurting. Terry.
I've heard a couple of others points on this, is that, was it also for him a foreshadowing, him feeling that he is going to, his
Could be.
humanity, he's going to experience that, right? And knows that he's going to go through that. And then just a wild one that I heard was he knows, maybe he knows where Lazarus is. He's going to have to bring him back from, back into pain and suffering in this world.
Yeah.
When he's already passed from it.
Could be.
Yeah.
So John's writing this as if he were telling the story in a first person. Like
As an eyewitness account.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But he wasn't.
no.
No.
So.
Well-
He wasn't born yet. John wasn't born when this happened, when Jesus was with Lazarus, right? I thought this was 100.
Well, there's debate on, and the first session we covered a little bit, there's debate on this is John the Apostle, there's, John the writer, there are a couple Johns. John was a fairly common name, so we don't know. My thought is, it's really not, you have writings that came from John the Apostle that were preserved, And the community that emerged out of his teaching is the community that curated it.
Right, okay. So maybe some of this was eyewitness stuff then.
Or maybe, you know, he was taking a break from Revelations and toad licking and decided to work on this and.
Now, I thought that was definitely different.
Well, they're written about the same time.
Are they? Okay.
And they do have common themes, and they're both apocalyptic, and they both deal with the mystical world and Christ's, you know, you could look at them as tandem, Christ coming into the world in this way, Christ coming into the world in judgment. But again, we don't know. We're all taking stabs at it. This is, again, I've said this in 5 years, I've said this again and again and again. Scripture has all sorts of problems. That's what requires the faithful community to journey together and navigate and figure it out.
Well, so if this was an eyewitness account of Jesus weeping, is it possible the human side of Jesus could have been experiencing some regret or guilt for not having been there earlier?
Could be.
And that this is his brother. It'd be nice to know all the backstory about his relationship with Lazarus.
I mean, it doesn't say that he says he hasn't gone into the room, so it's not as if he's seeing him. Lazarus was his friend, so yeah, he no doubt has. I mean, here's the thing: you walk into a room full of mourning people. You know, Jesus was empathetic. Jesus is the ultimate empath. I don't think empathy existed prior to the Spirit at all.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, Jesus was one who created the world, who wanted the humanity to have a relationship with him. He must have looked at how the fall caused death, and to see the mourning and the horrible emotional things that these people were going through from death.
Yeah.
And he must have cried because he didn't want that more than they didn't want it.
Yeah.
And he died so that we wouldn't have to have that. I mean, we still are gonna die, but we're gonna have eternal life. It just seems to me like the whole thing just hit him as an emotional thing.
Yeah.
As a human, too, his human side and his divine side.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and that's the thing is we don't know we don't know what Jesus was feeling. I kind of like the idea that maybe you know, Jesus cries in the Garden of Gethsemane and says, if you can take this cup from me. He wasn't gung-ho up to the last hour. He wasn't like ready to, you know, rock and roll, let's bring it. He was scared to death. And so maybe he did see this notion of sadness, of mourning, of, you know, and he was moved. In one of the other Gospels, he was moved right before Palm Sunday, or right before the triumphant entry. He's moved as he was coming into Jerusalem and saw the city. Again, it's our best guess to why. I don't want to definitively assign any emotion to Jesus, but I think that what we have to look at it in terms of John is, what is John trying to reveal about Jesus to those who hear about him for the first time? Compassion. So, all right, 38 through 44. Anyone? Jump? Anyone? Terry, go for it.
Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go."
All right. What do you hear? What do you see?
Did he still stink when they had to unbind him?
What'd you say? He stinks, right? Is that what you said too?
No, I said, what I see is that the story ends right there. I mean,
He's like hopping out. That's my image.
Like, I wanna know more.
He's like all naked and healed, doesn't know what happened. He's hopping out like, come on, come on, guys. What kind of hazing joke is this? He doesn't know he was raised from the dead. Perhaps you don't know when you die; you just die.
The very Martha who said, if he'd been here, he would have died.
Right.
I know he's going to be raised again at the final resurrection. Now, she's the one who's objecting, saying, he's stinking. I think that's what the King James says.
That's what it says in the life of. Have any of you seen Life of Brian?
I was gonna say, it reminds me of.
Oh, yeah.
Python.
Yeah, he's stinking.
There's never an appropriate time to watch that movie. But I'll tell you this, I actually, early in ministry, First Presbyterian Church, thought that'd be funny, and I hadn't seen it in years to just show it to my combined youth group. This one for the books. I was actually old enough to know better, too. And there's a scene where a woman opens shutters and she's completely naked.
Oh no, with the youth group. Oh.
So, yeah. So, yeah, that's not the greatest
Learning.
junior, good teaching moment. So, all right. Yeah, it's pretty standard. He comes out, and now so unbind him, let him go. End of the story. But it's a big one, and now the Pharisees are freaked out. Because it's not uncommon and you look at, this is why Pharaoh wasn't fazed by Moses' miracles. He's like, well, we have magicians who can do that. There's sorcery in this world. There are those who can control that spirit world and manifest signs and things that are of a dark order. Raising the dead is a little bit different of a story. So this is the point where now we're getting in the plot to kill Jesus because things are getting serious. And this is sort of the beginning of the end. Anyone want to read 45 to 50, the end of the chapter? If not, I will. Okay. But many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, called Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand. It is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have a whole nation destroyed." He did not say this on his own, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he would remain there with his disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and were asking one another as they stood in the temple, what do you think? Surely he will not come to the festival, will he? Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who knew where Jesus was to let them know so that they might arrest him. All right, so things are getting, the plot is thickening. The APB has been put out. Everyone's on the alert looking for Jesus. So what else do you hear in that?
I have one thing I noticed in that passage, and then I guess the two others that we read. It says specifically, believe in him, in this one it says believe in him. And I just think that's important because we can believe Satan exists and we believe in powers of evil, and just like the demons believe in God's existence. So it's not just saying we know that God exists, it's we believe in who Jesus is and we know him personally. Yeah,
no, that's good.
I think Bobby's earlier point was like, wouldn't some of the powers of be, but I read, as I read this, is none of the council was there to witness the miracle. They all heard it from people who were there, but they keep a distance, so they've got some plausible, is it deniability or so. I didn't see it, so I don't have to believe it. Right.
But they would see this as dark arts. Like this wasn't like, wow, this is like, hey, this is something that, that is not normal. Yeah. And they're fearful. because he's growing and more, this is leading up to his triumphant entry, where all of Jerusalem is celebrating. And if you're like, hey, that guy can bring people back from the dead, Uncle Joe's been sitting in the grave for 30 days. Can we get a call in? You got to be thinking in terms of the basics of them. He feeds them, he heals them, he preaches hope. All right, we're going to move forward then. Chapter 12, let's go ahead and read all the way up to 11. Can I get someone to read?
I'll do it.
John chapter 12.
Oh,
He heard me.
let's do
There we
it.
go. Yikes.
Siri, did you read for us?
Did he call on my
I'd rather
phone?
hear your voice. He's got a
All right.
better accent.
Yeah.
Okay. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave him a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me."
All the way down to 11.
When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus.
So this is like the miracle of all miracles. It's spreading like wildfire. What do you notice in this story of the anointing of Jesus? See a little foreshadow. What's that?
It's the second time, right?
This anointing, I don't think so. Not in, again, order. Where's the first
It
one?
was when Jesus arrived,
Is it 11? Is there a second anointing?
when Mary heard the teachers heard from no, before that, I think.
Well, it refers to Mary who anointed the Lord with the
Or am I wrong?
I want to know what Lazarus was thinking. They told him
Oh.
dead.
In 11:2, it says it was Mary who anointed the Lord with perfume.
So
Yeah, it's writing,
this is John's curation of it. So yes, the mention of
so you
it.
know this the same way.
But keep in mind, now I know we all do it. We have this image of this jar of oil that she's just like, it's all over the floor or something. But this narrative actually portrays the notion of nard is more like lard or fat. It was a solid. And she didn't use the whole thing. She's using it, but it's not as if she's dumping the whole thing. So again, is she really wasting? Well, she's in the process of doing it, and this is what makes Judas mad. But he says she bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. So she conceivably did not use all of it in this case.
Oh, yeah.
And this was the same oil. And so there are connections to this. There are connections to the disciples washing, Jesus washing the disciples' feet, love, servanthood. I love the last verse, and it's probably one of the most profound philosophical statements about the existence of humanity. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. So in other words, in this life, in this existence, in this iteration of whatever the world that we're living in, there will never be not poor. There will never not be suffering.
And it's not a money problem.
No.
Jason?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know if I've ever heard it explained why the Pharisees and the chief priests were so opposed to Jesus, except there's kind of a hint of that in chapter 11 when they say they're afraid everyone would put their faith in him, and then they say, then the Romans will come and destroy our temple and our nation. Was it because they were afraid of the Romans that they were trying to suppress Jesus?
They were afraid of the little control losing the little control they had. And you see that in the Passion narrative. They have to go back to the Roman authorities. They're trying to, like, they just can't take someone off and murder. And by this time, laws around cultures had existed so that you just can't go stab someone anymore. There has to be, not that you couldn't, but there would be consequences to that. But that idea that they were fearful of him because he challenged the very idea of their righteousness by law.
Right.
He challenged the very holiness of the Sabbath by working on the Sabbath. He suggested that the kingdom of God was for those who were impoverished, not those in power. And as Nicodemus, who was a part of the ruling class, when Jesus says you have to be born again, these statements are confusing for them. And it's like if someone came in and said, if Muslims came in and said all these things about your faith that you thought were true or not, you'd feel kind of testy. And when they have power from their adherence and their reliance to the law, then their authority, their power is being threatened. I mean, everything is about power in the world. What else?
Isn't this also about distinguishing between the faith of Christians and the Jewish faith? And since John, again, wasn't he writing this after the Romans had already torn down the temple?
Yeah.
I mean, the war with the Jews.
90 to 110 is roughly the suspected period this came in, and it was 72 when the temple was destroyed.
So it's one way for Paul to cast the blame on the death of Christ on the Jews, not the Romans.
No, that's always been, I think that's the case for all of them. No one blames the Romans, everyone blames the Jews. But for Paul, that had a purpose. You had to have the disbelief of the Jews so that the Gentiles might be engrafted. It is in the rejection of Christ as the Messiah that it is expanded to all nations. In Romans and Paul. But, I mean, this is where a lot of anti-Semitism comes from. Honestly, this is where, Hitler's sense of the pure race and the elimination of the Jews in large part was you rejected Jesus. So I'm going to get rid of y'all. So, and that stigma is still there in many ways. So as much as Jews have done well and have prospered, there is a stigma always of being Jewish. You think about actually when you think about that they constitute only about 3% of the world religion, but they occupy a pretty big space of world religion. I mean, numerically they are 3%. But the influence of Judaism globally is massive. So.
But also as you look into the future from the time John wrote this kind of sets up a Christian world. The Roman world converts quickly with Constantine, doesn't it? Relatively quickly to Christianity?
Well, you're talking now, you're jumping ahead 3 centuries. I mean, 325, his council,
But without the writings of John, how would that have been possible?
Well, all of that. I mean, Constantine claims to have come to faith through a conversion experience like Paul and seeing a vision. But Theodosius in 381 is who legalized Christianity and made it the Holy Roman Empire. But yeah, in the span of about 50 years, you had the entire European continent who was basically Christianized, which is why it didn't take. And quite honestly, set up the stage for many of the issues we deal with today. And those who sort of believe in this ancient future faith believe we should go back to the early church time, jettison the notion of our institutional churches and say that that's really not the way Jesus, we were meant to be radical communities of faith that lived out the faith in our own, not in the sense who have this larger. But I think that's also operating if we actually operate on the ethic of love and self-denial, instead of mitigating that for our own pleasures. All right. I was not directed at anyone. All of us are guilty, but some of us more. I'm just kidding. Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Anyone?
The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." The King of Israel. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see, he can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after..." Yeah, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him.
Okay, so we all talked about Palm Sunday. This is our rationale for Palm Sunday. It is what is considered his triumphant entry, the height of his popularity, which is ultimately like the height of also the angst of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the ruling Jewish class. And you had to have this conflict. So in just the narrative of the story, this is the height of the conflict leading to the climax. Anything you want to mention in there? Many times I've preached on the colt and things, so I don't know if there's anything.
No, just, we have a different use and understanding of Hosanna today than what it was at that point. It was they're trying to call this as our Messiah, and their understanding of Messiah was a military Messiah, more than what we think of it today. So the crowd crying out, "Hosanna, save us, save us," would have, if you're the Jewish leaders at the time, that's just throwing more onto what they're dealing with.
Threat to their power.
Yeah. Well, and because the power shifted, now they're no longer saved by the law, which is how, the ruling class has their business. If you all abandoned the church, I'd be sitting there by myself then, what's going on? Guess we gotta shut the place down. You need some peoples. So yeah, they definitely did not understand, which is why they quickly turned. It's the fad. It was popular. But it was necessary. Perhaps if Jesus hadn't come in, if they hadn't elevated him to this Davidic king that was coming into his reign, then the Pharisees wouldn't have taken action. So again, John is building that climax.
And even though he knew they didn't understand, he didn't stop them.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's for the empathy and compassion. Like, you guys are so stupid, you really don't know. It's like watching a bunch of it's like Lord of the Flies, watching, like, oh, they just had frontal lobe development. All right, verse 20. Anyone? You can read again if you want. If not, you don't have to. AI? No? Okay. All right.
Now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Anyone who serves me, he must follow me, and where I am, there will be my servant also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him." 27. Now is my...
We'll just stop there for a second.
Want to stop?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. There's a lot in there.
Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah, yikes.
So anyone who hates life in general,
We'll keep it for eternal.
will keep it going to hell, I'm assuming, or the soul, whatever, keep it.
Whoever hates their life in this world will keep it. I think he's saying that, was that, were you gonna say something? You said something. I saw your mouth moving. This is about hating this life. And this is a hard, again, I think that given our place in this particular, you about to say something?
Well, I think if you hate this life, and you're looking forward to the next life, and you're giving yourself as a servant to God.
Yeah. And this is a challenge, folks, I struggle with this all the time. Again, I've said this
Wait a minute,
before.
say that again. If you hate this
In
life,
other words, if you don't get involved with the worldly things, you become a servant to God, and you despise some of the things that are going on in the world, and you just tunnel vision, serving God entirely. Then I think what this is saying to me is you will be saved for that tunnel vision of serving God.
It is, again, this goes back, I preach this all the time. This world isn't our own. And this is the challenge. Now, you go back a couple hundred years, and if there were a very small portion of the world population that didn't live without tremendous discomfort and pain and hardship, that didn't live without pain and hardship. We have a far greater, unequal distribution of worldly resources to the betterment of largely those in the West, to our own comfort and enjoyment. And I say that very mindful of the fact that we live in a recreation retirement community. But that doesn't scare me. This is a hard one to deal with. Do we have a mamby-pamby Christian experience? Are we really disciples? I struggle with this. What does it mean really to deny ourselves? And this goes back to the hate your brother and sister, turning, like the gospel turns it against yourself. Don't worry about what you're going to go out on a mission, what you'll wear, what you'll eat. Giving all your money to the church so they can distribute to all those in the fellowship who had need. These are radical ideas that represent those who are like this. If I could tell you that in 1 year from today that Christ was coming back and everything that you had in this life didn't matter and you had a year, it's like Brewster's Millions, we would all live our lives very differently. And theoretically, we should. You want to put on the parable of the virgins who wait for the return of the master? It's not about let's just get it to the end. It's about and this is what I'm saying. If Christians in this world lived in that radical way, we would see the transformation of the world in a radical way. But if we continue to live our lives in the, cushy Christian world that we all live in, and I 100% am guilty of this. Is not an indictment on anyone in the room. We are all guilty of this. And I've said to some of you before, I'm about to receive an inheritance earlier than most people in their lives. And I'm wrestling with some questions. What do I do when I inherit a chunk of cash? What does that mean? Is it preservation for me in the future? I struggle with that. What does it mean?
I don't think this means so much material things. I think it means giving up your life, your ego, your desire to be in charge of your life rather than God to be in charge of your life. I don't think he's saying you got to give away everything you have. I think he's saying you got to put God first, and everything that says selfishness or being in charge yourself is
Control.
what he's saying you've got to give up, and you've got to give that up to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I don't know if one precludes the other, though.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
I know, but there were rich people in the Bible. Abraham had money.
Yeah.
I don't think God is against having wealth.
No, I don't think so either.
You need to use it in a responsible way. But if everybody were dirt poor, we would be in a terrible mess too.
Well, I don't think we would be in that case. I don't think it's a necessity that everyone be dirt poor. And I don't think it's an indictment on the rich, although Jesus indicts the rich far more than he does homosexuals.
I agree, because they are pretty ego-centered.
Well, because those who are rich, who preserve, are the ones who are valuing their life and existence in this earth over their mental
Or they have
Yeah,
determined
and
how they
they're-
want to live, and they have left God out of it.
Yeah, and I don't want to take the spotlight off of us. I think that's the natural tendency. But we're all guilty of this. The whole Western world is, forget level of wealth in the room. Even those in an average sort of situation in our country are way better off than the vast majority of the world.
Right.
And there is some sense if it didn't matter, if you knew in a month that it was all over and none of it mattered, we'd have a lot different relationship with our things and our belongings and the way we spent our money.
I'll read what this Bible is, teaching Bible says. It says, eventually loses it through death. But the one who hates his life in this world, Haran, and is concerned with pleasing God, Haran, will keep it for life eternal. If anyone serves me, he must continue to faithfully, that's all in print.
Yeah.
Follow me in print through without hesitation, holding steadfast to me, conforming to my example in living, and if need be, suffering and perhaps dying of the faith for me. Print.
Yeah, and brothers. Well, I mean, here this is the case where, yes, Christ was calling them to radical discipleship. This isn't an issue of salvation. No one's questioning anyone's salvation if they have money or they don't spend it wisely or they use it all for themselves. That's not an issue of belief. It's not an issue of faith. It is an issue of discipleship.
Okay, so here's my question that I've never noticed until right now.
Okay.
This is under the heading of some Greeks come to see Jesus,
Yeah.
right? Is there any significance to that? Because they're sending the disciples, and so Jesus is responding to them saying, some Greeks want to see you.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Well, that very notion, again, Gnosticism, and for those of you, is the idea that the material world is bad. And that falls right into the Gnostic value of rejection of the material world and elevation of the spirit world. And if you truly rejected this world, I've often used, and I've probably said this to some of you all, I'm a gamer, examples of games. If we were all playing a game and everyone was told that they should try to earn the green cubes, and you would do whatever it was to get the green cubes, and then about halfway through the game, you get a card that says the green cubes really don't matter. It's the white cubes that you really want to go for. And you can use those green cubes for those white cubes, but you're not going to win the game with the green cubes. And obviously, it's obvious where I'm going with this. We're kind of in a game. We're all collecting green cubes. We know the white cubes really matter, but we still focus on the green cubes.
Ouch.
Ouch, indeed.
To me, what stood out in this quotation from Jesus was the bearing of fruit. And but I always have wonderings, never knowings, when I read the Bible, and never claim to know anything, but what came out at me when was the analogy of his own death, dying to self, as being dying to self, and the grain of wheat being dying to self, and we dying to self, and actually bearing more fruit than if we focus on ourselves.
This is why Paul says that marriage is not necessary. And it's better to be single. And if those who are weak are the ones who are married because they are entrapped by their physical desires. And then he transforms it into saying that those in a marriage, and he redeems it by saying that's a representation of the body, the body in Christ as a marriage relationship, and it makes it a covenantal thing. But at the end of the day, again, it doesn't Judah's going through some, life sort of, he's in early 20s trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life, and I just say nothing else, you can go work a career, and if you're not, and it doesn't mean you can't work a career in business or in finance or something, it's still to the glory of God, to be clear. But sometimes, I said to him, one of the most influential men in my life was my barber. And to this day, when I go home, I don't even need a haircut. I cut my own hair. I don't even like how he cuts my hair. I go get my hair cut. So in other words, I think that it's about this goes back to the idea, like adultery. Is adultery actually having an affair? No, adultery is lust in one's eyes. And again, you go back to Romans, what Paul is saying is everyone is guilty. Because when we look at the doctrine of sin, you can't escape it. And yet we judge everyone. Everyone is sinners. We're all guilty of it. And yet we judge others according to the standards of how we view sin. How screwed up is that? We've missed the whole boat of what this gospel is actually saying. And it calls us to something radical. And it scares You know, I was about to say scares the bejesus out of me, but I said that once from the pulpit. I still have never lived that down with my family. And Silas now uses the word bejesus every now and then. He's like, if you said it from the pulpit, certainly you can.
Let's go back to
Yeah.
this, the Greeks wanting to see him, and that he just completely ignored it and seems like he went to a different subject. Is it because he was not ready for the Greeks?
I think it's showing that there was an interest. I think it's just showing that it wasn't as if the Greeks just jumped on board. It was like, hey, something is significant. This is on the tail end of Jesus' triumphant entry. It's demonstrating not only were the Jews celebrating him, but also the Greek, it's spilling out into the Greeks.
Yeah, in mine it says the Greeks were the Gentiles.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah,
Gentiles.
yeah, Gentiles and Romans too.
But did he have to die first before this idea of the Greeks coming in? Wasn't it all Jewish up until that
100%.
point?
This is New Judaism. There was no
And
Christianity.
he had to be glorified, he had to die before the Greeks or the Gentiles could come in?
I don't think the Gentiles were really in full participation until the Pentecost.
Right.
Which again is why we need to celebrate the Pentecost more rather than look at it as just a Sunday to wear red. It's the reason we have life. It is just as significant as the whole arc of everything. All right, we have 5 minutes left. Why don't I read and make a few comments so that we can end on 12? I know, as we were doing this, I'm like, we're never going to make it through this in 3 weeks. We do have a time frame that we need to make it through the other ones because I want to give myself 3 weeks for the doctrine of sin and all of its permeations. So I'm just going to let everyone know we're going to keep going as we are. Not today. I'll finish on 12, but we will just know in the future what we might do is we'll carry on with this, but I might shift this intense study to another time. And we'll put the switch, when we switch over to the doctrine of sin, we'll put that in the main 7:30 time. These will always be recorded, so if you can't make the time we meet to finish out the book, you can listen to the videos. And if you're joining us now and haven't joined us previous ones, well, there's a lot that's still out there that you can read. All right, let me read this. Now Jesus enters into the topic of his death. Now my soul is, verse 27, now my soul is troubled, and this is another way we see his humanity. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. And in fact, he does in the garden. No, it is not for this reason that I have come for this hour. And he's in being glorified at this point, the earthly exaltation. Father, glorify your name. It's indicating he is focusing on God and God's fulfillment and God's glory, not his own. Then a voice came from heaven, perceivably God, I have glorified it and I will glorify it again. So the assurance comes to Christ. The crowd standing there heard it. This is an instance where that means other heard a audible sound coming out of the atmosphere, and they said it was thunder. So what they understand as thunder, they heard something, they hear a noise, Jesus hears, and this tells you something again about who is God, doctrine of God, how does God speak? As a biblical theologian, you take all of these things, God speaks through thunder. Others said, an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered, this voice has come for your sake, not for mine. So it was manifest, and you see that again. This person was blind for there's something in exchange for other. These are things are happening for reasons. This is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. Again, Jesus wasn't the ruler of the world. He wasn't dominion over the whole thing. And I, when I am lifted up from the heaven, ascension, will draw all people to myself, what we're seeing in our world right now. And he said this to indicate, and again, John always does this. He has side commentary. It's a curated text. He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. The crowd answered him, we have heard from the law that the Messiah remains forever. And so they're drawing Old Testament teachings and saying, well, you can't go anywhere. He's going to be here forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? Still don't get it. After everything that's going on, Jesus said to them, the light is with you for a little longer while you have the light, meaning him obviously, so that the darkness will not overtake you. If you walk in the darkness, you do not know where you're going. While you have light, believe in the light so that you may become children of light. He's pointing it to himself. The unbelief of the people. As Jesus said, as he departed and hid from them, getting out of the crowd, although he had performed so many signs in their presence, they didn't believe. We're to the point where, again, no spirit. They don't believe. He's raising people from the dead. He's doing some crazy stuff, and they still don't believe. They still can't get there. This was to fulfill the words spoken from the prophet Isaiah. The Lord who has believed our message, Lord who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed. And so they could not believe, because Isaiah also said, He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so that they might not look with their eyes and understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said this because he saw the glory and spoke about him. Nevertheless, many, even the authorities, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess it for fear. So it's saying that some in the ruling class did believe, but they were fearful, for they feared they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved human glory more than the glory that comes from God. So they didn't want to be taken out of their high positions, their important roles, and so they didn't want to confess what they actually were believing. But what this is saying, in line with Paul in Romans, is they had to not believe. This is part. God did not give them belief. And this goes back to the fundamental nature of us as individuals. Do we have pure free will? Well, no. Did they have free will? Could they have overridden God's unbelief in them? No. So for me, an old AG boy who was all about free choice, went into a master's degree, came out a reformed quasi-Presbyterian. Why? Because I can't escape passages like this. There are things happening and controls that are taking place that we can't even understand. All right, last section. Summary of Jesus' teaching is my subtitle. Then Jesus cried aloud, "Whoever believes in me believes not in me, but the one who sent me. And whoever sees me sees him who sent me. I have come as light into this world so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in darkness. I do not judge anyone who hears my words and does not keep them. For I came in this world not to judge this world, but to save the world. The one who rejects me does not receive my word as a judge, and on the last day the word that I have spoken will serve as a judge. For I have not spoken on my own, but the Father who sent me has himself given me the commandment about what to say and what to speak, and I know that his commandment is eternal life. What I speak, therefore, I speak as the Father has told me." Again, this is a common theme we've seen again and again through John. He equates his relationship with the Father, that tight-knit relationship. But I think that really the heart of this is he's saying, I'm not here to judge you. That's going to come. You will be judged, but I'm not here now for that. So don't confuse that into saying, oh, Jesus said we're not going to be judged. He didn't come into the world to judge. The Spirit hadn't been there. God's not judging the world. It's kind of like until the law came in, God, there was no sin. Although there was sin, but there was not sin that was reckoned to them as sin. They weren't accountable for those sins. Then the law comes in. Now they're accountable for that. Even though they're accountable, he's not judging them based on it because those are laws that were placed in. He's saying, and this goes back to what I say again and again, that little bumper sticker. Jesus said, I did not come into the world to condemn it, so he probably didn't send. Jesus said, I did not come into the world to condemn it, so he probably didn't send you to do it. We're not here to condemn the world. The Word will do that. The Spirit will do that. Everyone will be held accountable for their own. We don't have to defend the gospel. We don't have to defend the truth. We have to proclaim the truth. This is what bearing witness is. John's notion of eyewitness testimony. We are an extension of the eyewitnesses of biblical times, and we bear witness in the testimony of our own faith to the events that happened 2,000 years ago.
Do we have a job to warn?
I think that those who come to faith and those who grow as disciples, that the Scriptures can warn them themselves. And you allow the. I think that's part of the job.
Do we have a job to warn?
To warn what?
To warn other people. To
warn them of what?
Of what they're doing, that they're going to be judged for that.
No, I don't think that's kind of like saying, hey, you need. This is my problem with 50s evangelicalism. If you don't want to go to hell, here's the solution. Not if you want freedom from the fear of and anxiety of death and hurt and pain. There's life in this. And the problem is we turned it to, you don't want to go to hell as the exchange rather than the life that we exist and the freedom that we exist. We don't know what's on the other side.
But don't we warn our children?
We train our children.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever warned my children that if they don't straighten up, they're going to burn in hell.
No, not burn.
Or even be judged.
You're going to mess up your life, or God is not pleased with that?
I think that God has way more great. I am trusting that even in a God that has wrath and indignation and anger, righteous anger, that there's still a God who judges our spirits and can take into consideration our brokenness. But this is the notion of the Protestant or the Reformed idea that there's a set number.
But if you really love someone, don't you wanna warn them that they're on the wrong, they're taking drugs and stuff, don't you wanna
I mean,
intervene?
I think in general, we want to promote people or push people towards positive living and a healthy way of living, but I don't think someone who takes drugs is necessarily going to fall short of God's glory because
No,
of
I'm
it.
not saying that, but you're warning them, don't do that. Don't we warn people?
Well, yeah, the same way I'm warning all of us as we sit here that we shouldn't indulge too much in our finances and our own earthly security.
And you are warning us.
Well, I'm not really warning, I'm just,
Yes, you are.
it's sort of embedded warning.
Jason, I have a question. In passage 31, in
And we'll end with this.
book,
Yeah.
it says that now judgment is upon this world, and now the ruler of this world will be cast out.
Yeah.
And it has in parentheses that the ruler of the world at this point in time was Satan.
Well, the personification of Satan or the accuser or the evil one, I don't want to put it as actually a person, but in some sense, yes. The one who tempted Jesus ruled the world.
Okay.
Dominion was given to evil, and this is what Jesus pushes back on, and then in his death, it is conquered. And then he reigns king. But even then, still, evil still exists. They're still Satanists. They're still doing some worshiping. Why are they still here? Because evil isn't destroyed. That comes in the second coming. So we're in the midst of it. All right. A little over. Sorry about that. We'll pick up 13 next week. Hopefully that was enlightening and somewhat condemning. Just kidding. Just joking.
Don't ever worry about it.